Microsoft is delighted to be at PyCon. Hope you are enjoying the sessions. Scan the QR code to join the Microsoft developer community and receive regular updates on many open source topics, including Python.
Hi, good morning. Welcome to PyCon APAC 2020. We are happy to be here. Today is Sudhir Rawat, and I'm here to spend the next hour with you. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Mathew, Director Developer Relations. My job is to inspire you to try new technology and learn what's the latest and best on Azure as well. Python is a community close to us and very close to AI principles and practices that we are going to talk today about, responsible AI. Let me dive right into it. Why responsible AI? Well, Brad Smith, he's our chief legal officer and recently wrote a book on this topic because Microsoft is deep into it and the whole world around us is actually debating a lot about this. He talks about the more powerful the tool, the greater the benefit or damage it can cause. And that applies for all technologies. Technology innovation is not going to slow down. The work to manage it just needs to speed up. Well, why AI and why responsible AI now? Let's take a quick look at it. Over the last 30 years, software has become a tool for organizations to drive innovation. So people started using software to make sure that they were getting more efficient, and that formed the basis of digital transformation. In the past 20 years or maybe 10 years, what has happened is that a lot of data in that process has been generated, and all the data gave rise to many practices like, say, data mining, analytics, and organizations have been using it to create the next level of improvement or innovation. So the first set of digitalization was around the systems of record, where it was about creating, digitizing or digitalizing their practices. So the business models remains the same. And the next set of systems that emerged was the systems of engagement. This was about different ways of engaging with customers, and that gave rise to a lot of data, not only about the products, but also about how customers behave and how they engage with your product or your people or practices. And that created a level of system of intelligence where people now could derive intelligence from the data, because there was data not only from their own internal ops, but also externally from their products and from consumer behavior. This was very critical in driving the next set of innovation, which was actually the digital transformation, and which we are in currently. Now, what makes it different today and why we're talking about responsible AI is just the pace of innovation that we are at, the amount of compute, the amount of model sophistication that has come in, that you work with day and night, and also the proximity to human intelligence. So if you look at what Microsoft journey has been in terms of our parity with human behavior and human sensing and intelligence, 2016, we achieved object recognition parity through to speech recognition parity, to reading comprehension parity, machine translation, came to speech synthesis in 2018, and of course 2019 general language understanding of human parity. And what do we mean by human parity? For example, if you take speech synthesis, if a robot is speaking and a human is speaking, and you played out to an audience, they would not be able to differentiate between, is this human or is this robotic? And because it is that human parity, that proximity to humanity that we have achieved with AI. And that is why now it's all the more important that the pace of innovation is so high that so much is possible to better the world around us. But at the same time, it's time to take a look at what are the systems we should have in place and checks and balances to ensure that it's used more for good than for bad. Like Stephen Hawking says, technology can be used for good and it can be used for bad. Transformation is not going to stop. So it is our responsibility to do some of this work. And well, today's debate is around a lot of things inside the AI space, right? From facial recognition, a lot has happened in the last year, especially around facial recognition, fairness, corporate responsibility, deep fakes. How do you differentiate between the two and how much of an impact it has on society? Obama's deep fake comes to mind. Um, Also about the disproportionate impact that AI could have on certain kinds of people if the biases are not removed. Algorithmic auditing, interpretability, all of that. And then again, what are the regulations we should have in place? Just like when decades and decades ago, automobiles came into play, and there had to be a new set of rules for the traffic, for the roads, for pedestrians, for light vehicles, heavy vehicles, etc. A whole system of regulation and sophistication in how you approach that technology came into play, and we are at the same space today. It is a complex and broad topic. Everyone who is involved in the product development has to be involved in responsible AI. They need to have a good understanding of responsibility in using AI, whether it is from a business understanding of who are your customers, who will be using it, what possible biases are there, to the data acquisition and understanding of, are you looking critically at the data during the data engineering phase and saying that, okay, this data is a fair representation, and how do you make it fair, to the modeling and how do you interpret it and how do you explain it, to the deployment and operation logics. So this journey has been something that Microsoft has been on, and we're sharing it today so it would help you and the world around to craft your own journey in towards responsible AI. So it started in 2016 actually with Satya Nadella penning an article introducing the concept. So he spoke about how can computers and humans work together for the better of society, and underlying that were some of the principles that we have to follow to make sure that this is possible and in a good way. From there, we created an Aether committee internally in 2017, focused on this, published our AI principles through the article Future Computed, called for facial recognition regulation as early as 2018. In 2019, we republished the facial recognition principles. Office of Responsible AI was formed in early 2019, and it's a central figure within Microsoft which drives how we practice these principles. And in 2020, the pilot of the Responsible AI standard. In this whole journey, we have been part of industry groups, including Google, Amazon, a whole other set of multi-industry groups which are working towards defining the new standards and making sure everybody is together on this responsible AI journey. So when we look at it from a software development or even an organizational perspective, we look at principles. So what are these principles and what do they mean for a software developer, especially an ML engineer or a data scientist? And then what are the practices we should have inside to make sure that we are happening? That's the ethics committee, governance, methodology, documentation for the same, and then the tools. So a lot of this has to be automated, just as we've done DevOps, in terms of how do you use tools to kind of ensure that differential privacy is addressed. How do you have tools like Fair Learn from Microsoft to say that, is your model fair? How fair is it? Can tools help you do all this? So principles, practices, and tools are required. A quick look at Microsoft's AI principles. So we talk about, we actually classify it into six areas of fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, and then underlying framework around transparency and accountability. Let's look at each of this. So fairness. How are people affected if your systems are not fair? So this is an article that came about a year back, which talked about millions of Black people being affected by racial bias in healthcare algorithms. What this meant was when they were looking at what healthcare practices can be given to whom, the Black people were actually being deprioritized, and you can replace Black with Asian or Hispanic or anything else, but essentially there was a bias towards the locals there, and maybe the more white male population, and then comes a white female population. Another quick look at how fairness play out. If you just Google CEO into Bing or even Google, you will see that a host of white male pictures come up. And this is, and why is this relevant? So just about 3 months back, I was in a panel meeting with a bunch of women in technology. And one of them was saying, like, I'm a woman in technology and I lead it, but my 7-year-old daughter, when I asked her to go see if you like coding, she went and searched around on the web and then comes back and says, nah, it's a boy's job. And she goes, why is it a boy's job? She says, the girl says, I can only see boys doing it. I don't see any girls doing it. So it's as basic as that. How are we influencing the next generation of women to be inclusive in this, right? So it's about fairness to certain sex. And a lot of it is in the algos and in the logic that we decide. Reliability and safety. Well, this is a study that was done on the whole autonomous cars. And especially Kara and Paddock published this report around this as to when do you think we can say that we are confident about the failure rates, or when we are confident about autonomous vehicles being on the road broadly. So they did a study around, say, how many mile years would the autonomous vehicles have to be driven to, the first point was, without failure to demonstrate confidence that their failure is par with the human failure rate. So it came to about 275 million miles, and it would take 12.5 years to run cars regularly. And considering they're driving it 24 hours a day, 365 days a year at an average speed of 25 miles per hour. If you do that, it'll still take you 12.5 years to say that, okay, that failure rate is at par with the human failure rate. Now, if you wanted to show that the confidence is at least 95% in terms of prediction of failure of the autonomous cars, oh well, then you have to ride 8.8 billion miles. That would take 400 years, right? And the third point was to say that the human driver failure, the autonomous car driver failure is better than a human driver failure. So if you really want to demonstrate that with 95% confidence, you need to drive 11 billion miles, which is it will take you 500 years to do it. Is that even possible? Absolutely not. So what that brings to mind is that there needs to be new ways of testing your AI models. You cannot depend on the old ways of testing and hope to achieve human parity or better than human parity in terms of the products that we are bringing to the table or to the road. So there is a whole set of work that is happening today to design these new ways of testing. And along with that, it's not only about testing the product. This calls to mind that it has to be a public-private partnership. It's not just the creators, but also the users who have to work alongside to create new rules and new ways of ensuring that these are able to come to life. A small one on the training data versus real world data. This was a study done by one professor out in the US, and one of his students came out with this paper, and this looked like a great model that he just looked at wolves and huskies. So they wanted to adopt a dog. They wanted to adopt a husky, but wanted to be sure that it is not a wolf, right? So they took those pictures and tried to predict, what is it? Is it a wolf or a husky? And then they found out that, okay, all of it was true, but only one mistake here. Well, that one mistake could be really costly if you take a wolf home as a pet. So it's got huge human impact. But what created that mistake? So when they looked at the underlying logic that the algo was taking, they found that it was looking at the snow and predicting that it's a wolf. And where there was no snow, it was saying it's a husky. So the one where there is, it was a husky, and they said there's a snow because, said it's a wolf because there was snow at the background. So if you did not get to the explainability part of the models, you would miss this, right? You might think this is okay, just one mistake, that's all right. So, and think about that in terms of healthcare, for example. When you're trying to say a patient is positive or negative for even COVID, or maybe any of the other diseases out there, you cannot afford to make that one mistake, or your false negatives could be at a great disadvantage. Even false positives could be at a great disadvantage. So coming to the next pillar, which is privacy and security. This has been a topic for a long time. So some of the things that come to mind, say the glass walls in China, where they are using the walls to kind of do facial recognition and then use it at the back end. Similarly, this here, Cadillac Fairview, they did not tell the mall patrons that they're using this facial recognition software to kind of direct them to the more targeted towards certain shops or advertising, and then they had to recall it because it's just not done. Similarly, another thing on privacy and security is a very interesting piece is that in the law and order situation, police captures a lot of private information of individuals when they going through the process of trying to decide whether this is a culprit or not. And the thing is, once you're a culprit, that is fine, that data is there on the record. But what about all the people who are not culprits? They were just acquired. And in UK, this came up in the court as well, because the law and order, the police department said that, well, we don't have the money and capacity to actually delete the millions of data that we have on people who are not culprits. But if it's not deleted, it would come up in AI systems later on. It says, oh, this could be a culprit just because the data was in the police record. So it's our human right to make sure that that data is deleted. But who's taking care of that? So this is the privacy and security angles that there's a lot more to dive into. Interesting piece that you can go really deep on. The next one is on inclusiveness. Now, inclusiveness is kind of, think about it in a positive way as well. So LinkedIn reported this economic graph research, and it looked at, are there gender differences in professional self-promotion? And they found that recent MBA grads, men tend to put all the summary fields and job descriptions in an elaborate field. They are more inclined to sharing that publicly than women MBA grads who are not filling in the summary or the job descriptions. So if you know, as a hiring organization, if you know that there is this gender difference there, then you can overcome it in your algos. You will not say that, oh, if they have not given summary and job descriptions, then do not take them into the next potential candidates. If you say that, you've just wiped out a whole bunch of women candidates for your job. So this is where AI needs to think deeply about inclusiveness. Bias on one side, but inclusiveness as well, because the positive impact is that companies do want a diverse workforce, and hence they do want different kinds of people. So is your recruitment algorithm actually taking care of the differences in the various races or genders or whatever it may be. And so inclusive design is actually a whole set of theory and practice by itself. Do try out this Microsoft.com Design Inclusive, where we are laying out all the inclusive design principles we use internally, and you will get inspiration to use in your work as well. Seeing AI is out there in the app stores, and it's a great way of showing how inclusivity AI can be used for inclusion and accessibility. This here, what you see is Sakib Shaikh. He is visually impaired, and he's part of our Microsoft research team. He played a big role in creating the Seeing AI application, which allows visually impaired people to look around with their device and be able to say who are they talking to in a meeting, or anything that's happening outside. Is it cars? It is people. It's a ground. People jumping up and down. Things that they don't generally get to know. So AI could actually bring in a lot of inclusion for the accessibility side as well. Transparency, yes. This is becoming more and more and more important today. And in a survey done with the decision makers and CEOs of over 4,000 organizations, the report says that this was fundamental to adoption of AI. Because without transparency, there is no trust. And without trust, people are not going to adopt. People are not going to adopt, then why are you even building AI? So this is fundamental transparency. The next piece is accountability. This is interesting because all of us listening to this is equally a participant in the accountability of AI systems. And we must maintain responsibility for and meaningful control over AI systems. Well, the facial recognition regulation itself is interesting because look at this public surveillance, and these cameras are out all across. And the interesting thing is that it chooses who to kind of survey depending on algos they have at the back end. So if you happen to be in a set of people that the algorithm thinks are potential to criminal. Remember what I spoke about being in a police record, even though you had nothing to do with it. But if you were in that record and that record was accessed by this algo, for sure you're going to be one of the people who are being surveyed. And so in the US, there's been a lot of hue and cry recently about Black people being on 24/7 surveillance, regardless of whether they were connected or not. So that's all baked in biases. But who is accountable for that, right? And that's the point. So this is a Stack Overflow developer survey asking developers, would you write code for an unethical purpose? Only about half said no outright. Another third said depends on what it is. And then another 5%, this is scary, said yes, they would. Because they didn't think they were accountable for it, right? So there's a lot of awareness to be done there itself. Who is ultimately responsible for the code that accomplishes something unethical? 58% thought upper management, the company. About 23% thought people who came with the idea. And 20% really did think that the developer who wrote it is also responsible for the code that accomplishes something unethical. So, well, do developers have an obligation to consider the ethical implications of their code? Almost 80%, everybody thinks yes, we do have an obligation to consider the ethical implications of their code. A few were, and about 6% said no, but most majority said yes, and then, but I don't know how. Fair answer. So in this journey, Microsoft has been about creating some sort of a structure. We spoke about, and it comes down to principles, practices, and tools. So we spoke about the principles, right? So this needs to be ingrained in everyone. As software developers, as data science modelers and engineers, we need to be clear about the AI principles first, and then how do you actually practice it? So here, It starts with envision. So what are the benefits? Sit with the diverse stakeholders and go through this and understand what are the potential risks, and have it black and white to the extent that you can define it. And then define it further with objectives, data requirements, and what are the responsible metrics that you will track throughout. So this is common for us, right? Something we have a metric on, we will manage that better, and we know what's the impact. So have those metrics defined. Create the prototypes and test frequently, and test with diverse audiences, so you're getting feedback from the customer that you're working with as well. Building it, integrate AI and the metrics and the trade-off, be aware of what you're doing, and then launch and evolve by continuously analyzing and improving. So these are some of the fundamental practices. Just one practice here is a ML interpretability use case. Now, how would you practice this? If you're a model designer or evaluator, you need to create time within training time to explain the output of a model, and then to debug your model and make an informed decision on how to improve it. Then you need to verify if it matches with pre-declared objective and ensure fairness. Now, these are things you do normally, but the point is to do it with a lens of responsible AI, right? So add that flavor into the training time and that process and that metric. On the end user's time, this comes up a lot. So AI predictions need to be explained in healthcare. If a person was classified at the risk of colon cancer, imagine the doctor telling the patient that you are at risk for colon cancer. He needs to, and if he used AI model to help, he needs to say that, and he needs to say why the AI model predicted that. And the reverse of that is, if in a healthcare practice you are avoiding a set of people, you need to be aware of that, and you need to be ready to explain that as well. So spend time inferencing how the model arrived at the outcomes that you are being told. Same thing for finance. Rosine did not get a mortgage loan, Charlotte did get a mortgage loan. And why? What was the difference? And why is one investment portfolio carrying a higher risk? What is just a individual identity thing, or was it something else? So these spend time on the training time and inferencing time, and this is just one particular use case. The thing is, there are challenges across the board. And the biggest challenge is probably the end-to-end tool fragmentation that is there today for data scientists and Python engineers who are here right now. Well, we need improvements in tools, and that's happening as we speak. So the journey here, I'm saying, how can you come along with us, is that we are AI Business School has a bunch of information, so encourage you to go and look at it. Also, your influencers, the leaders, the stakeholders in your organization. There are a lot of industry case studies, and there are also practical tools and guidance. So please feel free to go explore that so you get a better understanding of this. Then we have AI for Good grants. So if you're doing something on this responsible AI side to improve the whole system, do reach out to us, and then probably we can get grants, and we can have Microsoft engineers supporting that as well if it is of impact. Come join our community, scan this QR code, and you can keep up to speed with us, not only on responsible AI, but everything that we do. Thank you. And over to Sudhir Rawat. Sudhir, may I hand over to you?
Yep.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. My name is Sudhir, and let me just share my screen. And I'm going to share screen one. I'm going to swap. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sudhir. I work as a Azure Dev PMM with Microsoft New Zealand, and I have mentioned my coordinates on my slide. So if you want to connect with me offline or have any questions offline, feel free to ping me, and I'll be more than happy to answer you. Now, any talk about responsible AI, right, and the principles and the best practices and how you look into the the fairness of the model. But moreover, as a developer, right, or as a data scientist, what are the tools, what are the technologies that are available which I can leverage to make my life easier, in terms of focusing on my core job rather than, focusing on infrastructure or, installing the tools, configuring the tools, and so on and so forth. And that exactly I'm going to talk about in next 25 or 30 minutes. We're going to talk about how we can leverage Python and build the solutions in a framework where it will be easy for us in terms of the development, in terms of importing the libraries, in terms of taking the same framework onto the cross platform, right? And obviously serverless, it's a future. So we're going to talk about how you can actually leverage serverless and make your life more easier in terms of the cost and in terms of the manageability as well. So quick background, the history of the cloud development, and I think it's very relevant because, as I mentioned, serverless is future. We need to understand from where we are coming from, where we are at this point of time, and what we're looking forward, right? And I'm sure most of you already have some kind of understanding of on-premises, because that's where the journey started, and I have seen throughout my career as well, where we have all the softwares and Windows needs to be installed, firewall needs to be updated, and then we need to install various softwares, assign the policies, securities, everything we have to take care of ourselves, right? And then when the cloud comes into the picture, IaaS has become very popular because it was pretty easy for anyone to just take the VMs or the same knowledge and goes to the cloud and deploy everything over there, right? It basically release some of the pressure from the organization, because now behind the scenes the environment is taken care by the cloud provider, in this case us, Azure. But then with the IaaS, you still needs to install the OS, look into the security, look into the patches, look into the installing the development tools to work on, right? Then comes the era of platform as a service, where most of the things behind the scenes Microsoft take care of for you, and you just focus on building the application and maybe configuring some part of it, or maybe uploading some libraries that needs required to work with your code that you're deploying onto the cloud, right? And then comes serverless, and it's here, it's future. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about more in detail, but let's look more in detail. Before the cloud, there are a lot of questions for you, to understand. Hey, for example, what is the right side of services for the data or the code that I'm going to deploy? What all packages I need to be make it available on my server, right? As I mentioned, IaaS does make life easier because you get everything onto the cloud. You don't need to look into the market. You just need to understand what kind of what size of the VMs that you need, and you will get it. Then comes to the PaaS. You don't need to think about, hey, what about the scalability, right? In the infrastructure as a service, you need to install various VMs and make sure that it is a part of the availability set, and then you can roll it out for the external world so that scalability will be taken care of, right? Now with the PaaS, it is seamless because it's already taken care by the cloud, right? You just bring your application, deploy it, and done, right? And that's basically kicks off a very critical role for the digital transformation, because it makes organization life easier. Instead of managing the infrastructure behind the scenes, everything is taken care by the Azure. And then come the serverless. I mean, even behind the scenes, what is running, how you're going to run, because with the PaaS, if you could take an example, you have your platform always running, irrespective of you're using it or not, right? And one of the cool example of the serverless is you only pay for the time you're executing your code. So if I'm running my code for around 5 minutes, I'll get charged for the 5 minutes, right? Now, behind the scenes, it doesn't matter for me on which infrastructure is running, how it's running, what is the availability of it, security, performance, nothing. Everything taken care by the cloud. I just go and focus on my code development. Now, the another problem that developers see, there are a lot of different editors that are available, right? So if you're running any Python application on, let's say, Windows, or maybe then you go onto the Linux environment, then you install another editor. So there is a little bit of a learning for you, in terms of, hey, how I'm going to install the libraries in Python in that particular editor which I'm running on Windows. As an example, if I'm running the same thing on my Linux environment, how I'm going to inject my libraries in that, right? So the learning curves, apart from Python, you have to have learning curve with that particular editor that you're using, right? And that's where the Visual Studio Codes come in. It's a one framework which you can work either on Linux or Windows environment. Is going to work as it is in both the environment, and you can actually go and add the various plugins. So if you're running Python, or if you need some extension which is relevant to the Python, you can actually go ahead and get from the Visual Studio Marketplace, and you can inject it, and you can make your life easy over there, right? And tomorrow, if you go to the, let's say, Linux environment, just install Visual Studio Code as it is, and open your editor, and it's the same environment. So you don't have to learn again a new editor, right? The experience is same. So again, you'll just go ahead and install whatever is required, and you just open your code and start working, right? So you will be up and running in minutes, right? It has a strong OSS ecosystem. There are 19K contributors on GitHub. And if you want to be a part of one of the contributor, feel free to go ahead and join and contribute not only onto the framework, but then if you want to build any extension for your Visual Studio Code, you can actually go ahead and do that. And let me just go ahead and show a demo of it. So I already have Visual Studio Code installed on my Windows machine. And what I'm going to do is, So here's my Visual Studio Code environment. And what I can do is I can actually go ahead and say file, open a folder. I can open the folder where my project is exists, or I can create a new workspace or a folder. And then I can actually go into that folder and say, hey, I want to create a new file. I'll just give a name of the file, and I'll start writing my Python code over here, right? Now, if I want to install any of the Python extension, I can go onto the marketplace or the extension over here. And let's say I'll type in and say, hey, I want something related to the Python. And you can see it's not 1, 2, 3. It has many extensions available in the marketplace, which is related to the Python programming framework, right? So you can actually go ahead and install which one you want, right? And that's the beauty of the Visual Studio Code, right? You don't have to install everything. You just install what you want, right? So if I'm working on a program, basic developer, which is new to the Python, I can actually go ahead and install, which is very relevant for me, right? As my experience. But if I'm an expert, I can actually go ahead and install a more sophisticated extension over here, and I can work on it, right? Easily. I can create various environments. So as you can see on the down somewhere over here, right now it is connected to my virtual environment that I've created, which is connected to my Python 3.8. But if you're running in a Python application which needs to run on previous version of Python, you can actually go ahead and install and provide the interpreter path 3.6, 3.5, or maybe below that, and you can actually go ahead and target your code against that interpreter, right? And then you can start start writing your code, come back over here. You can start writing code and you can just go ahead and run it. Say, if I just press F5, I can actually go ahead and run this code. And there you go. So as you can see, just generate the various numbers and show that numbers in the plot, right? And I have installed some libraries, as you can see over here. Pretty easy for me to download these packages and make it run over here, okay? And because I have everything on my virtual environment, so if I open a new project, the same library, same requirement is not gonna impact my another project. So what I can do is I can again create a new virtual environment for that particular project, which is gonna target now in 3.8, and then install different libraries over there and make it work, right? Pretty easy for me to build and code against a problem that was given by my company in Visual Studio Code by using Python, right? Now, you can actually go ahead and integrate your Python with your GitHub repository if you want. And what you can do is you can actually go ahead and check in your code as you're done with writing. So right now, as you can see, it's not connected any of the source control. But if I want, I can click on initialize repository and it will go ahead and connect to my GitHub, and I can just go ahead and commit the code from the Visual Studio code environment itself, right? So I don't have to go anywhere else. Now, there are a lot of functionality that we are keep adding. For example, if you want to do a live share. So if I'm working on a Python programming language, and in this particular pandemic situation, if some of my team members are sitting at their home, if we want to collaborate with each other, I can click on the live share and, we can collaborate. I mean, like a shadow programming or a pair programming that we used to do, we can do with the same, right? Instead of sharing the screen over the Teams meeting, it is actually a live environment which is going to be available for all the invited users or the developers, and then they can do the shadow programming, right? There are a lot of extension available. I will let you go and explore more on that. Let me just go back to my presentation and quickly move on to the next slide. And let's quickly go back presenter and skip that. Now, so we understand the Visual Studio Code, how it's going to be relevant for me, and how easy for me, to install what I want for that particular project, and I can start building my project, right? Now, when it's come deploying the project in a server, we talk about, we have IaaS, we have PaaS offerings available where you can deploy your code, right? Now we also have a serverless, so you don't need to bother about it, behind the scene, what the server is, what is operating system running, how it's running, how that needs to be configured, what is the security, and what I'm paying, right? So the serverless is basically an abstraction layer between you and the actual server in the cloud, right? So you're not looking into what is the infrastructure is required, right? And how it's going to get maintained. Now that's not your job. Your job is to focus on your code that you're writing, right? And then it basically provides you the instant event-driven scalability. So if you're building, let's say, an IoT kind of an application in Python, and you're sending the events, it basically gonna scale out based on the number of events that are coming, and that's gonna happen instantly, right? So, and then last but not the least, pay-per-use. We already talked about it. So if you're running for 15 minutes, you will just get charged for 15 minutes, right? So that's the beauty of the serverless. And these are some of the benefits, as I mentioned: your focus, your efficiency, and flexibility, right? So you're going to focus on solving your business problem, bringing new features into your code for your customers. You will become very efficient because now you're focusing on code and not the other part of it, which is infrastructure. That means it will be a shorter time to market. So the feature that you're going to release in 3 months, you might end up delivering it in 2 months, maybe. I'm just taking another example, right? Your fixed costs will get converted into the variable cost. That means you will not get charged for the services which is you spinned up and you're not using it, right? It has the flexibility in terms of connecting to the various services onto the cloud, and you can just go ahead and just go ahead and get connected and and also you can just spin up your serverless environment very quickly. I mean, you don't have to be, think more about it, how you're gonna, what size, nothing you have to take care about it. This is function as a service programming model, which use the serverless compute. And these are some of the examples of that. I'm not gonna get into that because I have little less time and I want to more focus on the demo. But I hope you understand that, we have the responsibility, short-lived, stateless, and event-driven and scalable. These are the key features of it. We already touched upon this at very high level. Yeah, that's the core benefit of it. You can focus on code and not onto the plumbing of different services which you want to bring together. It also boosts your development efficiency, because what happens is, when you are writing in a code, and be it on an IoT, or let's say be it on for the AI, you don't need to, you don't need to actually think about how you're gonna get connected with different services, right? I mean, how many piece of code that you're gonna require, right? So behind the scenes, Azure Functions provides built-in, you can say, connectors, which allows you to bind seamlessly with those services, right? For example, if I'm creating a web app, and then what I'm going to do is I'll just go ahead and want to send in an event to an HTTP endpoint. I can literally go ahead and do that with that, right? And it's very easy for me to do that, and I'm going to show you that as well. This is we talk about, and what I'm going to do is quickly I'll just move on to the demo just to make sure before we end up with the time. I'll show you some demos how these things work. So just to start off, let's say I've created a folder into the Visual Studio environment, and what you can see over here is I have an extension which is my Azure extension, and I have get connected to my Azure account. And what it does is basically shows all the subscription that I have, and then it basically connected with the different services. So at this point of time, one of the services is connected to is Azure Functions, right? And what it does is it basically allows me to create a project, or maybe I can create a function right from the Visual Studio, and I can actually go ahead and deploy it as well. And I'm going to show you that as well. So let's get started, create a project. And when I'm going to click create a project, it's going to ask me where you want to store this project. I'm going to say, okay, code 9. That's going to be a folder. And then it's going to ask me what is the language. So as you can see, Azure Functions basically supports various languages, and Python is a first-class citizen over here. So I'll just click on Python. Obviously, it's asking for the interpreter. I'm going to say Python 3.7. And then it's going to ask me for the template, right? So as I mentioned, it basically, you can trigger your serverless code based on the various events, right? For example, your HTTP trigger, your blob storage trigger, your Cosmos DB, your Azure event in terms of the IoT hub. If you want to bring any data, for example, any data file, a CSV file in your blob storage, and you want to spin up functions to take that CSV file, transform the data and load it into different database or in a storage, you can actually go ahead and trigger that onto the blob storage. And as well as if you want to do it on queue, you can go ahead and do on the queue as well. So you have the blob storage, you have a queue as well. If you want to get any messages, you can do that. So for example, I'll just say time trigger. For example, I'll give a name to it. I'll provide the information, how frequently I want to run this code. So let's say I want to find some information in a database every 15 minutes. Or maybe what I want to do is I want to create a the serverless program, which basically going to take a backup of my database every 15 minutes. I can actually go ahead and do with this timer functions, right? Now, once I'm done with that, it's basically going to create a virtual environment, and it's going to create the project for me and download all the code, and it will be soon available over here. Now, while it's doing, and I think it's almost done, if I go over here, you can see it basically gets all the required files for me. And now what I need to do is, I can now in this function, I can actually go ahead and start writing the code that I want to execute every 15 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever interval that I've defined, right? And taking a backup of a database, you don't have to manually, just go ahead and spin up your serverless code and make it run automatically, right? Now, I'll just go ahead and minimize. I'll show you another example. Okay, so this is an example of triggering my function based on any file that lands in a particular folder. So what I'm going to do is, I've configured this. I'm going to run this program. And either I can deploy or and then I can run it onto the cloud, or I can actually go and do the development without hosting the Azure function onto the cloud. So that means my local development and as well as testing the functionality of the code that I've written, I can actually go and test it over here as well, right? So now you can see it is basically listening on my local host, right? And now what I'm going to do is it basically listening to my Azure blob storage, which is sending onto the cloud. So I'll go on to the cloud over here and I go to the folder and I'll go into the container and this is my directory. And what I'm going to do is I'll probably delete this file and I'm going to upload a new file over here. And I should have a hello.txt file. Open this up, upload this file. And once this file gets uploaded, I'll just go back over here. It's basically gonna, once it's done, as you can see, it automatically triggers. Now, you might see a little bit of delay, I mean, in a microsecond, and it's because of I've connected to my mobile network, and hence that this microsecond latency is there. But as you can see, as soon as it gets uploaded, it gives me the storage name, and it gives me the size of that, right? Now, I can actually go ahead and write my entire code over here, to take this file, do the transformation, and move it further, right? I'm just going to stop. This is the one of the example. And I'm going to show you another example over here, which is of the HTTP trigger. There you go. So here what I'm doing is I basically, I'm basically deploying in an HTTP endpoint. And as soon as I'm going to hit this endpoint, what it's going to do is basically going to, look whether the name is there or not. So let's say I provide a query string at the name. And then it basically gonna not only gonna tweet about on my Twitter, but it also gonna capture the tweets based on this hashtag, which is at the rate PyCon Malaysia, right? And I'm gonna change this comment. I'll just copy this comment and I'm gonna say, let's go ahead and post this comment, right? And now let's go ahead and execute this code. So I'm gonna run F5. And now you can see it's going on and now it's listening on this particular port. So let's go ahead and follow this link. And there you can see it's triggered, right? So that means it's working. And now what I'm going to do is I'll just say name equals to, I'm going to say Python, most probably, right? So now it basically, put the Python and the entire code get executed. And now you can see it basically, the last one, the tweet, right, which I tweeted a little long time ago today. And it basically captures that information. Now, if I go into my Twitter account, and if I go to the home, to my account, and there you go, right? It's just 36 seconds before we just put this up, right? And again, if I'm gonna hit this endpoint, it's gonna, again put up on a tweet, right? I mean, this is, now the possibility is endless. I mean, did I bother about it? Which operating system I need to install, where I need to install? I just go ahead and deploy this code, and deployment of the code is very simple. So for example, the same code, I've already deployed it onto the cloud. I'll just go ahead and stop this. And before I'll show you the deployment, I'm going to show you another example of the typical IoT environment where you send your events to the cloud. And this time I basically connected to my event hub. So let me just run this code. And it basically listening to my event hub, and it's all, you can see it's all the Python code. And what I'm doing is I'm listening over there. And once it gets started, so it's connected to my event hub trigger. And now I'm going to run my Visual Studio Console application to send this events to my event hub. You can assume this, I'm sending these events from my devices, which is running on the field. And 3 events has been published. So good. I'll just stop this application and go back over here. And now you can see all these 3 events gets captured in the real time, right? And how quickly it's gonna be for me to deploy this code. Let's see that. So if I go into the function, and if I have a project over here, let me just, I'll go. And in the functions, you can see, I can say, just go ahead and deploy this to my function app from the Visual Studio Code environment, right? So all my Python code, I can actually go ahead and deploy. And you can already see that I have a couple of code that I've already deployed. So I can just go ahead and show you that. This one, and it's going to expand. And again, I think it's going to be a trigger on HTTP, if I'm not wrong, or if I remember correctly. And what I can do is I can, once I deploy, it can create everything, all the function, resource group, and everything. It's just going to ask you where you want to deploy. I'll just go ahead and copy this function URL because it's running onto the cloud in my serverless environment. And I can actually go ahead and say, go ahead and run this. There you can see it's running. And again, the same, I can say name equals to PyCon 2020. Let's go ahead and run this. Right? And I capture that name, I just printing it over here. So that's the that's the feature that we're talking about, right? Now I have 1 minute before I just go. I would let you go with this thought. Stay healthy and keep learning. I mean, I'm very passionate about yoga. So I do yoga in the morning, and then, when I do coding on the Python, I do some similarity in the Python and the yoga that I do. It's easy. And, you can, build very complicated applications with the ease, which is going to be very robust. And same in the yoga, you can go at, any level of the posture. It's gonna bring you stability in your mind, in your body. So with that, I will hand it over back to the moderator. Probably I'll stop sharing. And
Microsoft is delighted to be at PyCon. Hope you are enjoying the sessions. Scan the QR code to join the Microsoft developer community and receive regular updates on many open source topics, including Python.